All right, so welcome everybody. Today, as I said, is Summary Across Trials, ST. Really kind of as a refresher, we're going to go fairly quickly through the kind of the beginner session. Hopefully condense this down a little bit so that way we have time for plenty of questions if there are any. So without further ado, I will switch over here to my ARM. And if you haven't used ST before, it actually just lives kind of entirely within the ARM installation. There's no separate install. When you purchase, you just have the new feature available in ARM, and you just kind of toggle over from the file menu. You can switch over from ARM into Summary Across Trials. And there's the beginning wizard here, or if you come just directly to this empty screen, that's kind of where we first start out. And so what we do in ST is we create separate file called a criteria file. And so to begin, it's very similar to setting up a protocol in that we need to define the definition that we'll use. And you're going to make the same selection that you do when you create a protocol. The G-all is most likely what you want to use. That's for pretty much all disciplines. And now we come to the kind of the beginning here of really creating that criteria. And really there's three main components to a criteria. And here is the first one, the trials to search. So we will point ST to a certain number of files that we want to investigate and combine. And so a couple of ways to do this. If your company has the ATD database, you can actually connect directly to that database and pull files down from there. Or you can select trials that are on your current computer, or maybe a network share, Dropbox, something like that. And so I'm going to go ahead and click this button to select trials to search, and it will display my study list. And I am going to toggle over to the tutorial just so I have kind of a common set of files that anyone can kind of step through and utilize. These files are installed on everyone's computer with your ARM installation, so you can kind of step through these steps as well. And you can certainly make use of all of the filtering and finding features of the study list. All of the fields up here are for really filtering and finding studies that are listed down below. And I am just going to pick these 6 here that are all the ST example 1. So nice and easy. It's pretty simple example to show, but it works well for kind of just this introduction to ST. So I'm going to select 6 of those and press OK. And so now the text updates to give us a little 6 in parentheses. So a nice confirmation that we do indeed have 6 trials in our hand ready to look at. So that's the first component. Next one here is just settings. Really the only one I typically care about is how you prefer to see your treatment units. Otherwise, you can always get back here if you need to. Now, when we say next, it's going to bring us into the criteria file. And it's actually going to start the second part of the ST criteria, the treatments to search. So here, of our 6 trials that we have chosen now, we can select and build a list of treatments that we care about. And actually, ST has a tool, we call it Build Treatments, that will actually look at all of your trials you've selected and build a list of all the unique treatments that it can find. And that can be a really great starting point. Depending on how consistent your trials are, that might be all you need to do is get that list. But if nothing else, it's a good starting point to then build and tweak the criteria into the true list of treatments that you definitely care about. And so that's what I'm going to do here is let's build from those 6 treatments. And then we can tell ST exactly what it should consider to be a unique treatment. And so the different columns that you would see in your treatment editor, we can select any of those to have ST consider a treatment to be different. So for example, by default, we have treatment name selected. So of course, if it has a different name, it is probably a different treatment. And then we also have the rate and the rate unit. So even if it is the same product, but it's being applied at a different rate, then we would want to detect that and have those as separate treatments in our list. Certainly, if you have a different requirement, you can turn these on or off. If you're doing a lot of formulation work, maybe you would come up here and you would want the formulation concentration and unit to also be considered in this matching. So you can kind of choose and select what matters to you essentially when we have ST look at the treatments and give our list of unique ones. I'm just going to keep the defaults here. Treatment name and rate will do us well in this example. And then we have a chance to select trials. If we wanted to pick a subset or something like that, we didn't want to look through all 6 of them, we could change that here, but I'm going to want to use and incorporate all of them. So that went pretty quick, but ST did open up all 6 of the trials and scan the treatments real briefly to build this list. And what we ended up having here, we have a confirmation. We ended up with 4 different treatments, and they actually all came from the same trial, which tells me that we have a very consistent list. It is unlikely probably that in the real world we'll say it is that clean, but it has that potential if all of the trials came from the same protocol that you might have that. There was a question here about selecting by active ingredient. Let me just click OK real quickly here and just run the build treatments again. So if you want to try again and just kind of start fresh to build treatments again, there's a button here on the properties panel that will let you do that. And so if I say, OK, oh, it didn't ask for those treatments to match. That would be in Tools, Options. There's the treatment fields to match. So if we bring that up, actually, this is where I should have went the first time to see if there's the active ingredient. And so we have the treatment, formulation, rate, all the information other than the active ingredient. And I think the main reason for that is kind of how the active ingredient is saved actually in ARM trials, because typically the active ingredient details are in your personal list. And so if you are a sponsor sending out a trial to a CRO, you may not want the CRO to have all of those ingredient informations. They just need to know the product name and how to apply it. So typically that active ingredients end up saved just on the computers of those using ARM who have built up their lists. And then that product information doesn't get saved into the trial because a lot of times that ends up being, confidential. And so I think ST would have kind of a hard time using the active ingredient information if it may or may not be present in those trials, or if you don't have that connection to your list. So great question. All right, so here are the results from our build treatments. You can see in ST, it actually looks a lot like ARM. We have a treatment list here, and this is actually going to be our criteria. So it's slightly different, but hopefully a very similar appearance. And so we had 4 different products that were found. So it was somewhat irrelevant, I suppose, that we had selected the rate column in the first place. Treatment name would have sufficed there. We've got Super Stomp, Stamper, Sure Kill, and an untreated check. Again, very clean list. Very unlikely that it is this clean in other examples, and we can certainly show some of those if there's some questions on that. But we'll keep it pretty simple here and just point out that there are some other tools. There's a few columns all the way to the right that are new in ST that are helpful for matching, combining If you have a product that is, let's just say, for example, Stamper and Sure-Kill are actually the same product and just had different names. One's an experimental name and then one is the final name or whatever. There's some tools you can do to make these two match again and kind of combine them. So there's definitely more you can do with the treatment list, but as kind of a starter here, we'll just kind of keep it simple. And real quick, my OCD here is unhappy with my rate. If I go back to my settings, so clearly all of the rates were entered in metric, and that would explain why I have such weird converted numbers. I'll just switch my settings and it'll just convert everything across. Let me come back here and see if it refreshed. Well, it didn't make it that much nicer either. But at any rate, the real nice thing with ARM is it can convert between different units. So if you had across those different trials, kind of a mix, ARM can understand what each of them are, and if it is actually at the same rate and it's just converted between the two systems, ARM can resolve that easily. ST can, so you don't have to do any extra work with different rates if they are actually effectively the same. All right, so moving on to the third component, I would say this is probably the number one issue with somebody getting started with ST. We did a real nice job when you create a new criteria. It steps you through those first two things you have to do, but then we kind of just leave you there. So the third component of the criteria really is the assessment data, what to do with the data columns. And so that's our third component to this criteria. And I kind of like to visualize it. I do actually have a slide here. Maybe I'll just utilize as I talk about it. I like to visualize the data columns kind of like a deck of cards. So we have our 6 trials in our example with a number of data columns in each one of them for all the assessment ratings that were performed in the trial. And so our job in the criteria is to decide what to do with those columns. Which ones should we combine? Which ones do we not care about? Which ones should we split out? And so it's very similar to a deck of cards in that we can sort them. Let's put all of the face cards together and drop out anything with a number. And then maybe of those face cards, I want to put them in 2 different piles, one for each color. So you can define how you want to combine, mix them, sort them, things like that. And that's really what we're going to do with that assessment column in the criteria, is to define what ST should do with that deck of cards, with that list of all of the data columns in all of those trials. So that's the goal here. And so if I click into this first column, ST will actually present some defaults. So if you have no idea what you're doing, you can always just take these defaults and just start. But really, I kind of like to walk through a little more specific example. So to start with, kind of the most basic thing you could do is select certain columns. So if I click into like the rating type, kind of the what was it that you did in the assessment, there's a little gold box. And if you've used the study list, you'll recognize that box as a filter. And so in our case, it will show us all of the different rating types that we have across the different data columns in our 6 trials. So maybe we only really want to focus on the columns with yield. We can certainly do that. I can select just yield from this list and press OK. And now we will basically define that we want to drop out any data columns where the rating type is not yield. I don't want to see them. I don't need them. Let's only get the columns that have yield and then put them together. Then maybe the next natural step, you can certainly continue to focus in on what you care about, would be the rating unit. So we can drop down this list here and look at the different choices, because for yield, certainly we might have the raw yield, or we have a converted yield. You want to make sure we get the right ones to look at. So maybe we're interested in the ones in kilograms. Of course, I don't think there'll be a yield in percent. Those are probably different data types, but let's focus in on just anything that has yield in kilograms, and that's what we care about. I'm going to actually delete these other characters. These are wildcards, which we will get to in a minute. I kind of like to just visualize it without any of that extra stuff. To do a real simple example with radian type is yield and the unit is kilograms. So that's the third and really final component to a criteria. And so what we want to do next is actually run the summary and see what we get. Before I do that, we do have a question here about treatments. So can you select specific treatments from the list to run instead of all of the treatments running the stats each time? And so, yes, what I would say there is that the selection of treatments is essentially what you have in the list. So if you want to run and only see certain treatments, maybe I don't want to see what Stamper is, I would simply delete that treatment from the list. So that's not going to affect any of the trials. We didn't delete a treatment from any of the trials, but simply the question we're asking in this criteria query that we're going to run is now just going to turn a blind eye to those and only grab this list of treatments. So that would be what I would do. And actually, let me undo that treatment. If it's kind of one of those investigation things where you don't, from the get-go, maybe this still is the list you care about, and you just kind of want to see, well, what does it look like if we don't have that treatment? What I would do is actually save the full list. So what you can do here is File, Save, and we're actually saving the criteria. So this isn't anything with the assessments or any of the summary we've done. It's just the list of that question we formed, the list of treatments, the assessment data, and our list of trials. It's not going to bring the trials with or anything like that. And that's going to be put into this STC0 file, which is just a criteria file. So I like to name the file to kind of tell yourself, because you'll be the one opening it later, remind yourself what you were doing here. So in my case, I'm going to call it, ST exam. Those were the trials we were working on, and yield in kilograms. Just to remind myself of what we were looking at, maybe instead of the exam, those were the trial names, or I could maybe include something with my treatments. Whatever, when you look at the name later, can remind yourself, oh yeah, this is what I was working on. So you can save that. I just threw it onto my desktop. Here's a longer description you can put in here if you'd like. This is only read once you're loading the criteria. So once you have that list saved, now you could be free to delete. We don't care about the Stamper in this case. We want to see what happens if we get rid of that treatment. I can just remove that. And here it's, I'm not sure what sort I have applied, but I do want to say yes, renumber the treatments, because in this case, I only have 1 through 3. So then I can now either run the summary, or if this ended up being interesting, I could always save as and create a separate criteria with this different treatment list. So the nice thing is when you're saving a criteria, you're just saving a question. So you can make as many little changes and save each one if you want to. And here, maybe it was, maybe this was really just focusing on the super stomp. So that was why I deleted the other treatment. And so I would just adjust my file name to remind myself the difference between the last one I just saved, and I can save this one too. Again, I'm just saving the question. focus on super stop. So you're just saving the question. So if you have a bunch of different questions you want to ask, that's kind of the approach I would take. And now here to get back to the original, all I have to do is open a criteria and go right to my desktop and open that one we just saved a moment ago. Now we're back to our full list. Great question. All right, so once you have the components, and you'll see, so I still have my treatment list. Just to verify, we have our assessment data here that we've specified. I do notice down here, my trials to search were cleared out. I'm not sure what I did wrong there, but if I just go back to my settings, I can always reselect. So I'm going to select my trials to search again. Yeah, it seems like it didn't like, probably because I'm on the tutorial list. Sometimes when you're in that, then yep, see, right now I'm not back on my tutorial list. It's my regular trials. So I think that's probably why I lost my list, is it didn't see these tutorial files in my regular list. So let me just reselect those. Okay, so we're back with all 6 of those trials to search. Okay, so now to run this question and see the results, under Tools, we can begin summary. And kind of a nice recap of what we've done so far. We've got 4 treatments. We have 1 criteria data column, and there's 6 trials to search. So now it's going to open up each trial. Maybe some warnings here about not enough degrees of freedom. So maybe I have some missing data in some of that, but that's not a big deal. I do like to review the information here to see that all 6 of the trials matched. And actually I can see that here as well. 6 tested, 6 matched, and 1 column was combined with 1 summary column, which we'll see in a second. But this is great if you don't quite have all of them match. You can kind of see which trial might have something different than the question that we asked. So I'm going to say OK here, and we will proceed into the kind of the summary here. And so what we have is, somewhat similar to an AOV report. If you're familiar with that in ARM, we have the list of treatments down here, and we can choose which columns of information matter to us or not to have on the report. Then we have the assessment header description visible here. And then to the right, then we have the actual data, the results, the statistics. And so what we have is this first column, if you can tell, is shaded somewhat in blue, and it has a number at the top. So this is the first grand mean column. And so this has the grand mean across the different individual trial columns that are to the right. So here I have ST exam 1, 2, 3 through 6, and we have the data columns listed that matched our criteria. For some reason, I only have the untreated matched, so that's the only one coming in. So I wonder if I kind of messed up our rates a little bit. We might have to go back. But as you can see here, this is our grand mean for the untreated treatment across our 6 trials. And we can see there's actually 6 data points that were brought into this grand mean. And then we can view each trial that was involved in combining this yield in kilograms. So that is the general report. It would look a little more interesting, of course, if we didn't mess up our treatments a little bit. And so kind of fortunate that I had this, because this is a pretty simple example. And normally there's not a whole lot that goes wrong relative to, maybe a more realistic data set where you don't quite get what you want. the first time. And so the nice thing is we're just building the question. So it's just a matter of let's go back and ask it a little different to get the results we want. And in this case, I think we need to ask our treatment list a little bit different. So we can just close the summary and go back and make a change to get what we really want. And in this case, I think I might just delete all of our treatments out and rebuild them. Since it seems, I think our rate, let me just check that treatment. We'll do it in metric this time and then build the treatments again. Oops. I kind of wonder if when I converted those, something weird happened to us. That looks much better. So we've rebuilt the list. Now our rate is actually kind of a legible number, so that's helpful. And now we can just ask our question again. So tools and build summary, and just run it again. So kind of a back and forth, typically as you work with ST to see what you end up with. So here, once again, everything has matched. So that's good. The real question will be once we get here. All right, that looks much better. So we actually have all of these treatments were matched. So we have 6, data points coming from each of those trials. And so now we actually have grand means with mean separation, and you can control what gets put on the report. Maybe you don't need the min-max standard deviation. You can turn some of those on or off in the options. But that's the basics of ST. Once you get the analysis the way you would like, I'm going to press next, and we'll actually get to the print dialog, just like you see in an ARM report. So you can preview that on the screen. It's the bulk of it is what we just saw on that last dialog. So we have our treatment list, which I'm definitely going to need to shorten down if I want to have any sort of information on this page. But then we get that grand mean and then the individual trial columns. Actually, it looks like my margins are a little weird as well. So that's probably contributing to the poor look there. We actually fit it all on this page now. And so there we have that main table, just like we saw a moment ago. But now we do also have, let me zoom in a little bit. We do have some statistics down at the bottom of that table for each column. And then we have an AOV table for the ST grand mean column. So this is for the grand mean column. And then we also have the AOV table for each of those individual trial columns. And just want to point out, probably the biggest number here you'd want to check out would be the treatment by trial interaction term. That one can be real useful for looking at your summary and how appropriate the statistics may be, is whether there is chance of interaction in the results there. So I just wanted to highlight that number, although depending on your level of statistics, maybe all of this is pretty exciting. It just kind of depends. So that is the report you see. You can, of course, print it out to your printer. Kind of the best output, I think, for actually kind of outputting that results is actually Excel. Typically, Excel isn't the best option for an AOV report, at least as far as kind of making it look pretty, because it's hard to have the report look the way you're expecting when you trying to make that hide, that's fine. When you have that report, but here actually in Excel, it's really nice because you really aren't limited by any page. So this will just continue to scroll. If you had a lot of columns being involved, it'll just keep moving to the right. It doesn't make really any longer of a report. So the Excel output is actually pretty nice for ST. Just to get the numbers in another format, Excel actually works pretty good. So let me go back. There was a question about the min, max, and standard deviation in one column. So this would be, again, this is your grand mean column. So we're really summarizing across all of the different trials, or I should say across all of the different assessment columns that were matched. So specifically all of the assessment columns that were yield in kilograms across the trials that we chose. And so here it's telling us that the minimum value that went into this mean is 18.6, which it's pretty easy to visualize here. We can just see it's really coming from this list of numbers here. 18.6 is the smallest. The maximum would be 25.8, 25.08. And then that standard deviation is, of course, across those numbers. So these values are really referring to the grand mean column, which is the data from these 6 trials being combined into one. Question on the treatment by trial. Let me just go real quickly here. So the treatment by trial interaction is really what we're looking at. So that treatment by trial line here, we do get the p-value. And so what you would be hoping for would be a non-significant value. So if this p-value is less than your alpha, which in my case, I believe I'm running at 5%. If it was less than that, that would be a sign that there is interaction in the data. And that is something you are hoping not to have. So in our case, we just got by. It is just over our 5%. And so that is good. If it is significant, then really how the treatment performed might vary based on the trial that it was in, which is really not ideal when you're trying to combine all of them together. And so that's kind of the quick line on that interaction. You don't want it to be significant. If it is, there are some tools in ST that you can look at. There's a treatment by trial interaction graph that actually is a pretty cool visualization of some of that. That will really let you investigate that interaction and help cluster out different trials. So maybe you look at all of the, in our case, maybe a more real world description of the interaction would be that if there was a significant interaction, it would tell us that some of these treatments, maybe one of the treatments performed very well in a high yielding trial, but then also bottomed out in a low yielding trial compared to the other treatments that were maybe more consistent. So if that is the case, then it's a little hard to trust your analysis per se, because do you feel great that any difference you see in these treatments is because of the treatment or because of the distribution of your trials? So if let's just say that Stamper, he's kind of a hero treatment where if it's a high yielding, he just shoots for the stars and just really does great. But then in a low yielding trial, it really bottoms out, doesn't do anything. Well, then as we run the 6 trials, and if we were to see that Stamper was significantly better than the other products, can we trust that that's because Stamper is better, or is it that maybe of these 6 trials, 4 of them were in high yielding areas and 2 of them were in low yielding? So it ended up his superpower of really going over the top was much better. You kind of have that trouble. You're really not certain about those results. So that's kind of some of the theory behind that interaction. And again, there's some tools to kind of investigate that. So you can look at it, and maybe you'd want to then focus your analysis on 2 different sets of trials. Let's look at the high yielding on their own and draw some conclusions, and then let's look at the low yielding and draw some conclusions, if they do happen to be different then because of that interaction. Great questions. Last one here. how can I verify if it is statistically correct to analyze the 6 trials? So I don't know if that's a little bit touched on that treatment by trial. There is a graphing function. So here I'm on that summary page here, and there is a graph that we can generate. And this is just asking for labels for the report. And so you can graph out the data set. And in this case, here I'm graphing out the treatments. So I can see the different treatments down below here. And then this would be the combined means for that grand mean column 1 that we were looking at. You can also look at kind of the other cross section, each different trial, how the different trials performed regardless of the treatment. So in our case, we can see, this kind of tells us which are the high yielding trials. Their treatment 2 was a higher yielding trial than the others. There was also some more variability though. So you can kind of see both sides of the fence there. And I'll turn on that treatment by trial. That actually is what I had referenced before. And that that's that great tool for investigating the interaction. You're looking at the slopes. You also get a clustering to see what's high and what's low. And sure enough, it's a little small here on my screen, but this says treatment 2 is way over here. It's the highest yielding by a good margin. So that kind of confirmed that what we saw in the other graph. In general, I believe as you look at combining multiple trials in ST, some of those assumptions of ANOVA that we really worry about in a single trial, a lot of that gets washed away in ST just because you have many more data points now as you're bringing in more trials. And so a lot of those issues, non-normality, once you get more and more data, it's less and less likely that the data is not going to be normal and things like that. Our statistician is actually working on a new tool for ST, kind of a parallel to the column diagnostics. So there might be in a few months, we might actually have a longer answer to your question there, Pavan, about verifying if it's appropriate, the trials that you have. We'll actually have a diagnostics tool that you can dive in a little deeper to your trials and learn a little more about that data set too. So a great question and a nice opportunity to foreshadow a little bit. So. All right, well, I think I covered all of the big points. Of course, we did it fast. We had a pretty simple example. I appreciate the questions, want to encourage other questions as well. So feel free to pop those in while people type. If they do have some more, I think I would like to show one little more, a little bit more sophisticated example of the assessment criteria too. Since we were very, very plain here, and I didn't even show the other wild card, which is really where you start to get powerful in ST and can get fancy, if you will, of what you do. So when we had first clicked into the column, there were some of those @ symbols, and I deleted them out to be really, a really simple example. But really what we can do is split out the data column. So our first example, we just matched. We only wanted any data column that was yield in kilograms. And that's all that mattered to us. Maybe instead, and I'll just kind of use this yield example here. And if you recall, when we dropped down, there was a kilogram and there was also a metric, a quintal, I think, maybe 2 different units. There might have been 2 different types of yield that were specified. So although last time I only picked 1, if you use this @ sign, that is the match and separate wildcard. So instead of just picking one and that's all you get, it's actually a way to split apart and group the different rating units in this case that we would find. So essentially, as we look across all of our data columns, we're first telling ST, I only want data columns with the rating type of yield. Okay, drop all the other ones out. Now, after you've done that, let's look at those yield columns and look at the different units. And if you find any units that are different, I want you to put them in different groups. So if we do that and run the summary, I'm going to use the toolbar shortcut to begin summary. It's the same thing as tools begin summary. We're just going to ask that question again. I've got some errors here, but these are just the assumptions of AOV errors, so you can ignore those. Now we actually have 3 match columns. So when I say okay, we will see a little more involved column here. So we have our original match of yield in kilograms. So that all looks familiar. But we didn't just stop there with kilograms. We also have another grand mean column. So this is column number 2. It's also in blue here, and we have the grand means. Looks like this was probably converted because we have a lot of decimal points. But now, instead of just matching on kilogram, we have separate analysis buckets, if you will, for the different rating units we discovered. So here now, it looks like we had 6 columns. So it looks like one from every study, actually, that had the, again, I think it's the metric quintile, if I recall right. And we get the grand mean and all those statistics for that set of data columns. And finally, if we come over here, we actually did run a third rating unit for the yield columns, and this was the percent of check, or the percent of untreated. And so now we get a great analysis here of those data columns. Again, one from each grand mean column. Then the very last column at the end is a composite mean across all of those yield columns, if that is useful to us at all. So just wanted to demonstrate that little more involved example with those data columns, that you can put them into different groups. It works really great for, pest or crop. Of course, you won't necessarily want to combine those. So putting an @ sign in the pest code or the crop code will give you a great same type of analysis, combining for whatever other criteria you have, but we'll put them into their own buckets to split them across. All right, looks like I got some great questions here. Is it possible to see the grand means for the untreated, but exclude it from the statistical analysis? So let me check my options, because I think in general, like we had shown a little earlier how you could delete a treatment so that way the check would be not in the analysis. But as far as excluding the check while still having it here, I'm not seeing an option offhand to do that. I might have to play around with that offline a little bit, just to see if I can make that work. But in general, let's look at format here. I don't think like I said, there's really not a selecting of treatments, because you're really doing that with the criteria. So essentially the EC, in an ARM trial, we have the action code EC to exclude the check, but how do we do that in ST? I'll take that one offline and just try to play with that a little bit to see. That's a great question, and I don't know right offhand how to do that. So I'm jotting that down to check that one out at a later point. So Next question, can you leave the assessment headers blank or free from symbols other than what you want to see specifically? So here, so we have these asterisk, which is really the same as a blank, which means do not match the field. And so that's really, leaving it blank will keep it off of the report. So if you don't want to see anything other than what you've specified, then you can leave them blank. I believe if you put an asterisk in the field, then you can have that display on the report. So if you had something you want to see with the report, but not actually part of the criteria, then you could use that asterisk. But yeah, certainly just leaving some of the header rows blank will keep them out of your reporting to simplify the view a bit. Probably could do the same thing for like the treatment. So maybe that's why my formulation information was showing up, that if we were just to clear that information, then maybe we won't have that on the report. So kind of similar to ARM, where if you don't have something filled in, it will try to leave it out in the report unless you specifically select it. Then there's another great question about the assessment criteria utilizing the treatment eval interval. And that's a really great example for when you're combining trials. Let's say that you want to, you're going out and you're taking an assessment maybe every week after an application. You're going to go out 7 days, 14 days, 21 days after an application. And so you would want to summarize based on that timing. I would like to put all of the 1 week from application together. And then separately, I'd want to combine all of the 2-week assessments. Of course, they're going to have the same rating type and the same rating unit. And actually, let me clear these out here. And I think we would have that example if we chose the control. So let's just say we're going to do a control rating repeatedly. You can't, thinking about that, you really can't use the rating date for a criteria because, of course, in each trial, the date itself might vary. So that's not terribly reliable way to group together the trials. So exactly as the question was posed is, let's use something like the interval instead. So that really is the best way to capture that thought of, I want all of the 1 week after application, I want to combine all of those together. So you'll notice when you click into this field, I don't have a gold box. If you don't have a gold box, go over to the ST properties panel, and you can actually build by using this scan for criteria button. It's in this possible criteria. And so if I press this button, it will scan those 6 trials. And actually, I can match the existing filters if I wanted to only see the control. So it's going to kind of populate that gold box for us, essentially. And that gold box is, instead of being right here, it ends up in the properties panel as this list of possible criteria for the treatment eval interval. So what's great here is, if I look at my numbers, I've got 10, 13, 15, 16, 17, all of those maybe are about the same time frame. They're all about 2 weeks after that application. And so depending, of course, on your trials, maybe the 10's too far away. Maybe we really know we want the 2-week range, and all 4 of these are acceptable to us as far as how far away from that 14-day target that we have. So you can select more than one from that list and create the range. So now it has 13 through 17 days after application B. And we can actually continue to select different ranges. So I'm going to say yes. And so that was our 2 weeks after. If I look at our data, we also have kind of a cluster around the 50, 52 days or so after that application. So I'll hit range on that, and then I'll say, no, I'm done. And so now we actually get 2 different criteria columns, one for that 2 weeks, that 14 days after application assessment, and then also a separate grouping of the ones 51 to 55 days after application. So that's a great way to group those together. I'm just going to run the summary then so we can see what we get here. All right, so we have our control rating from 13 to 17 days, and it looks like we actually have 19 data columns that were combined into these means. Although we do have just our 5 of our 6 trials that were combined there. So that mismatch makes me think that maybe I need to check my criteria. If I was expecting really only 1 data column from each trial, then I'm kind of concerned that there's definitely more than 19. 19 is way too many for the only 5 trials that I have here. So we might need to change probably the rating unit. I wonder if there was 2 different types of control rating that are being combined here. But at any rate, this will kind of show that this was the grouping 13 to 17. And then as we come over here, it did really the same thing, but the 51 to 55 range. And if I open up the options, so there was the question about the difference between 7 days after application B. It might also take 7 days after application A. So there is an option. Let me just open this again to show you. In the options from the summary, you can also get there from tools and then options. It's on the ST summary options page, this first one here. There is this option that says match treatment evaluation interval suffix. So I think you would want to turn this one on. So if there is a difference between 7 days after application A and 7 days after application B, if there's a chance that both of those columns exist in your trial, you would want to turn this option on. So when I ran it, it was off. And so really it didn't care. It happened in my case, both application A and B were done before any assessments occurred. A really simple example. And so it really didn't matter to me whether they chose A or B. It didn't matter to me. But there are definitely cases where it does matter. If you have an application, some assessments happen, then you have a second application, more assessments happen, then this option would matter. And for me, I don't think it's going to make a difference. When I change that option, it's going to run everything again. I'm going to guess for me, it's going to be the exact same because everything was after B. But for your example, I think it would make a difference. Yeah, I ended up with the exact same because they're all after B. But that's a great example. Again, just from the options, it was the summary options, whether we should match that treatment eval interval suffix or not. Great question, and it's a really great example in general, utilizing that interval. It really adds some power to your criteria, how you want to ask that question, what we should do with those data columns. And just to show that 19 count here doesn't make me feel great. I really don't like these numbers I'm getting then. We can go back to the criteria and maybe we should specify our rating unit. And sure enough, as I see this, there is a percent and a percent of check. So I wonder if I don't have in those trials a percent and also a percent of check calculation. And we really don't want to combine those two together. I just want to see maybe the raw assessments, we'll call them, the percent control there. So again, it's just kind of a process working with ST of going back and changing your question and then pressing OK and running the analysis again and see, is this give me what I want? And just kind of working back and forth to tweak that question. If I go down here, I can see 6 were tested, 6 matched. I have 2 match columns. And I guess that didn't make the difference here for my case. Still have 19 data points for that. And so in general, this would be a point, if you get stuck, no real obvious, why is it doing that situation? I usually recommend going to your ARM and opening up another ARM window. So you have ST running, trying to figure out what's going on. Then let's open up and log into another ARM session and open up one of these trials. Let's figure out why is what I'm asking, not giving me the results I'm looking for. So in my case now, I would open up my tutorial list and go find one of those trials, say, well, why am I getting so many data points? Kind of it's a nice sanity check to look to see what, am I making an assumption on my data that I don't, that I shouldn't be? And so I can look to see, I do have percent control. Actually, they're on 2 different dates. Well, why or they're on the same date. And then I can see, oh, it's different pests. Of course, depending on the different weeds that I have, then right now I'm combining all of them. I'm not even considering what weed is present in my criteria. So I'm getting all of the weeds, combine them all together to see what we have, which might be good. Maybe that's what I want to see, is I don't care what weed's present, just how good are these products at getting rid of those. That could be valid, or maybe that's not at all what I care about. And so I could go in here, and here's a great example. Maybe now we can put the match and separate into the pest. And actually, maybe we don't care about this later section anymore anyway. So I can just delete this data column, delete data column 2. So now we'll just focus in on this two weeks range and run the summary again. Question that popped in while this runs, is ST able to run a frequency analysis of the data points for selected criteria? I don't believe we have much analysis for that. We've got the count here. Let me pop open my options, but I don't think we have much that specifically, specifically targets that information. And really thinking about the graphs we saw earlier, that's really just those 3 here that didn't really focus in on the frequency either. So I don't think we dive into that much. Like I said, there we might have some tool in that diagnostics. I can't say I know exactly what all is going to be in that ST diagnostic. So maybe something like that's coming, but at the moment, short answer would be no. Nothing outside of just this count to see what we get. But just to follow up here, what we do have now, we changed that summary, and now you can see we have a different pest code, and everything is split out much more, whether it's positive or not, whether that's what we wanted or not, that's what we got. So now there's 3 points, data points that go into this grand mean here for the Cheel pest. And each different pest now that we encountered is split up. And it looks like it varies between 3 or 4 trials that had that same pest in it. And so it's all split across all the different ones there. So. All right, well, we've reached our hour here. I want to thank you for your questions. I see one more came in, and I do want to say I have a few minutes I can hold on, but I don't want to keep anyone too late. So I just want to say thanks for those that participated. If you have another question, fire away. I've got one from Brad here I'll address in just a second, but if you do have to go, thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you soon at another webinar. So looking here at Brad's question about ordering assessment analysis, can ST order the analysis in different orders, like sorting yield in descending order when exported to Excel? So we'll go back to our handy dandy options. And I think that would probably be on this main page. As far as sorting goes, I think like the order of treatments is the order of treatments, that we specified. So I don't think we have an option to necessarily resort those, but we do have some mean grouping, and maybe that's not quite what you're asking for. You can split out the means based on you kind of grouping the means. Largest ones would be grouped together, smallest ones would be grouped separately. But yeah, as I say that out loud, I think that's not quite what you were asking. Sorting the yield in descending order when you export to Excel. Yeah, I don't think that, here all of our examples, they really were just given to us in the order that we specified them on the treatments. I know we can do that in ARM, but I don't see where we really change the order of those treatments. Yeah, I'm thinking that's a no. I'll jot it down and play with it just a little bit offline, just in case I can get it to work. So we would want to really sort the yield, in descending order in the analysis. Kind of seems like the treatment order is the treatment order in the criteria. But yeah, I'll look into it, just see if there's anything else that can be done. Looking at the study list, I think the order of your treatments or the trials that you select, you could maybe work with that from the study list. But I think the question was mostly the treatment order and seeing those yields. Unless you export this to Excel and then apply a sort. But that might be pretty hard to get things to to move as a group the way that they should, unless your treatments were all on one line and you didn't have the min-max stuff. Then it might be a little easier to utilize Excel to help you sort that kind of after the fact. So yeah, great questions. A couple of them for me to chew on as well. So that's great. I might learn a little bit too. All right, well, if there's no other questions, I appreciate you guys joining today. Based on the good questions and good turnout, I think we might try to do a slightly more advanced ST session in the future as well. Just kind of get a feeler out doing the intro and seeing what questions we have. Can concoct maybe a little more extreme examples with treatments and things like that to be able to demonstrate. I will say, just in general, it's hard to do these ST tutorials because it means a whole lot less when you're looking at someone else's data. You know, once you're able to get in with your own trials and start poking around, it's much more interesting, much more alive, because no one knows your data like you do, and certainly looking at someone else's data is much less fun. Especially when I have to come up with philosophical ideas, philosophical examples that hopefully are general for everyone, then it means a lot less than when you're looking at your own. And luckily we had some questions that helped us dive in a little bit to what your own data might look like a bit, with the intervals and stuff. So yeah, I would encourage anyone just to get your hands dirty in ST a little bit. It'll probably mean more, and definitely always can reach out to us if you have questions. So thanks, everybody.